part two of Moray B. King's presentation today. If you don't know who he is by now, don't mess with him because he is full of zero-point energy and knows how to use it, as he will now explain. Moray?
When I lecture kids, and they say, "Have you heard of zero-point energy?" You say, "Well, yeah, The Incredibles." The villain uses it, right? That video on Ryushu Masa, remember that video. That is the most successful project ever to get going commercial before getting slammed and suppressed. So we're going to talk about getting bigger effects with water vortices. The idea is we're going to convert water vortex towards a plasma vortex, but you don't have to go all the way. You can just get some ionized particles in there, you start to approach it. The plasma vortex will create the biggest effects. Victor Schauberger, heard of him? Famous for studying water vortices, including claiming some free energy claims and that sort of thing. He had these whirl pipes and said, oh, when I precess water, he made a precessional flow, a spin of a spin. You get this bluish glow at the bottom of the whirl pipe, and it was, I think it was a small effect relative to what we're about to see. You know this guy? How many people played with GEAT? Played with the GEAT apparatus. The GEAT, it's right on Tesla Tech, right? I read his book, and I also personally talked to him over the years, including, especially very significant back in 2000 when we talked to him. But basically, there's his apparatus. It's the fuel goes in, there's a rod, the fuel spirals around the rod, it's vapor, it's ionized vapor that spirals around the rod, coming out on the exhaust. It spirals around the exhaust pipe too, so it's a dual vortex. One for the feed, and the rod was, depending on the nature of the fuel and everything else, would be cut to different lengths and that sort of thing. There's the book. When I read the book, it knocked my socks off some of the claims that I saw in the book. And I'll just share some of the high points, and I'll share some of what he shared with me personally. For starters, they could observe a plasmoid at the back end of the rod. The rod would tend to get magnetized in this direction if the fuel was coming in this direction. And he would have a little quartz window, and you could see it. It would be blue at lower energies, and if you really revved it up, it'd start to turn orange. So I got excited. Oh, plasmoid, that's my thing, right? At high speeds, he was claiming he could get surrounding plasmoids around the whole apparatus, in the air around the whole apparatus. They would be bluish at lower energies, but he revs at higher and higher speeds, it would start to turn orange. And then he said it could even begin to disappear at even higher speeds. I was astounded. And he said, shades of the Philadelphia experiment. And Paul says, I wisely did not stick my hand into the field. Good for Paul. I like this experiment. He talked about this in the year 2000 to me personally, as well as it was described in the book. All glass, great reactor, including the rod itself, a glass rod. And guess what they could now see into the apparatus to see what's going on. And they would see lightning activity around the rod, all this bluish lightning. He loved teasing people a bit, especially skeptical professors. He would use a glass rod, when it's vertical, the pole would be north. It seemed like, okay, maybe we made a permanent magnet out of the rod, but if you flip the rod over, north is up again, as measured with a little compass. And if the rod is horizontal, it doesn't seem to be magnetized. So it's like something aligning with the magnetic field of the Earth coming downward. And he said the professors and the skeptics would always get so upset by this, they would drop the rod and break it. Right? So he said you get the same effect with metal rods, he said. But it proves we're not making a permanent magnet. So that was another incredible observation. It's like we imprinted it with some type of dual vortex action. It manifests north to come back up. Crazy fuels, you hear that one? You know, crude oil, pickle juice, right? Coffee, soda pop. He's intentionally being silly, right? to not be taken seriously. Because I asked him the obvious, well, what about water? He goes, no way. I will not do water experiments. I've been threatened. And he was claiming out of Saudi Arabia or something like that. And I will not do that, right? But he certainly was implying it. I said, well, duh. That's the obvious thing to start trying. And he did mention, it starts to freeze up the manifolds as he pulls the vapor and things like that. So you can imagine that starts to get us into pure vortex experiments. Now he's doing dual vortex experiments, and he's ionizing the vapor. So he's getting towards that plasma vortex. And so that's the idea. Plasma vortex coheres a zero-point energy, whether it's from ions in the frictional charged particles like charged dust from friction, or grapple or little microscopic ice pellets that charge from electrostatic, or plasmoids. Any vortex of this, you'll start to get big effects. And thus, in every tornado, it's happening that way. And people that have survived a tornado, being pulled into it, witness ball lightning inside the tornado and this type of activity. And there's a lot of theoretical work on the thunderbolts, especially showing the electrical activity of a tornado. So basically, all this stuff is cohering to zero-point energy or entraining the ether. It's the same thing. All vortex phenomena, you're always going to have some ionization going on, and you're going to always have a coherence with the ether itself. Give a shout out to Don Reed because he nailed it. Early paper there, the Beltrami vortex, a mathematical form, and naturally wants to implode, right? Yeah. It was the key to unlocking vacuum, and darn if all the evidence is not pointing to that very, very important mathematical insight, straight up from electrodynamics. So what can we do? We had the goal. What's the goal? The easiest experiment. Clear. We like no other fuel involved, just pure water phenomena. We wanted it easy so there can be widespread replication, because widespread replication beats suppression. And we're going to see suppression is really the problem. It's really stopping the progress. So what's the best experiments? I picked the energetic fog gas from the water electrolyzers 10 years ago because the anomalies were there and it was so easy to do. Everybody, it was very popular, all the hobbyists said this has got to be a grassroots movement, and that's why I picked those projects, because we're getting ZPE effects, in my opinion, from these types of projects. Yul Brown was famous for seeing the anomalies in the torch. HHO, he proposed atomic hydrogen as the explanation why the torch is so anomalous. So that phrase stuck, HHO, for all these projects, but that's what it means in chemistry. The cool flame, you know that flame, you can pass your hand quickly through it. It's barely above the boiling point of water. It doesn't boil water, and yet it can melt tungsten, and Yul Brown believed he was vaporizing it, or certainly would oxidize it. A huge temperature on the torch for that. That's highly anomalous, something cool doing that. There's an example of how cool the flame is and what it takes to do it. The welding torches really struggle to do it, to vaporize tungsten. And yet here's this little weeny Brown's gas torch. This was the clue. This was what put me onto it. I knew about EVs from Kent's shoulders. When they hit the metal and make the crater, they disrupt the atomic bonds of the metal. It is not heat disrupting the atomic bonds. Then when the bonds are disrupted easily by coherent energy, the electrons fall back to the ground state in the metal, and that's what makes all the glow and the heat, is the metal interaction with the electrons falling back. That was the clue to let me know that there's something in the torch. But I needed a symmetrical particle to make the ball lightning. It doesn't just form in the air. You've got to wrap it around some microscopic particle. And what is it? The whole search was 10 years to search for a particle, water cluster of some sort. I credit George Weissman with the first to suggest it. He called it electrically expanded water, or suggested maybe some type of liquid crystal structure. So historically, he wrote about that. So he's credited with the first proposal, 1996, for the discovery. People in their various electrolyzers get cool fog coming off of it every now and then. Here's the HHO mist, a blow up of a video that just shows all the misting activity and the turbulence coming off the apparatus. So why not inject water mist directly? Well, that's exactly what Stan Myers did. In his very last project, he abandoned electrolyzers. He went for, on his dune buggy, he was driving it from the water injector plug. That was the last and the best of his experiments. It was like a little shower nozzle. He would mix water, ionized air, some rare gas with it. Here's a front view. It's from the Canadian patent. It's like a little shower head in a way, ionizing the air so you can get that plasma discharge. Abrupt plasma discharge would drive the piston. He wanted to mass produce these things. It wasn't simple because he had to use lasers and that sort of thing to get the air ionized. This is what happened to Stan Myers. I personally knew him. That was research by an investigative reporter researching the death of Stan Myers. So why do some electrolyzers succeed where most people that just tried fail? And that's because they make abundant nanobubbles. And nanobubbles was the particle I was looking for. I didn't know they were stable. Turns out I was in good company. The entire academic water community could not believe such things could be stable. Right? They did not believe they were stable until the Japanese measured them, starting in 2006, with a microscopic laser tracking. They could track individual bubbles. And by 2010, the water community reluctantly finally accepted their existence. So what's happened on this quest to find this particle to make the ball lightning around, it was right in front of our noses, it was the nanobubble, or the fog particle, or the droplet. They all do the same thing. They're incredibly tough. That's the big surprise. And the water community is still arguing over how can they be so strong, because just surface tension type phenomena and hydrogen bonding, like weak hydrogen bonding, can't do it. So let's look at those surface nanobubbles down at the bottom. They can withstand pressures like 60 atmospheres, real one. And they bend and come back up. They don't get destroyed. It's just an amazing structure that water could do that. Here's the key why they're so stable. Takahashi was the lead professor investigating nanobubbles in Japan. This is from his patent. It's because they're polarized. If you trap charge in the bubble, imagine that. It cocoons it. The water's polarized. It attracts the membrane to it. All of a sudden, we made something very strong by that attraction. Right? That was the key. That's the key to making it stable. That's why it's so important to charge the particle and trap the charge. That's what's made the stability, and then once it's stable, we got the ball lightning. Andrei Purhach wrote a very nice patent studying the electrolyzers back in the 80s, noticing the polarized bubbles, and they were very tough. And it's a good patent to read because Purhach was a scientist, and he would talk about the details of what he's observing. So the patent's a good read over that. And so how do we make nanobubbles? Lots of ways to make them once we've discovered they exist. Electrolysis, cavitation, microchannels, ultrasound. It happens all the time in electrolysis. So what happens in electrolysis, we start with a nanobubble. It gradually grows to a microbubble. That's not as stable. That bursts and then releases the free hydrogen. So they're observing that now, and that's the explanation for what's happening. So if we can scrape off the nanobubble while it's still small, we can get the strong particle rather than let it grow. And perhaps that's what Archie Blue did. That was the whole purpose of blowing air through the electrolyzer, to just shear them off before they could grow the microbubbles. And then he was claimed to run a car on it. Cavitation, phenomenal stuff happens in cavitation. The reentrant jet, the power of that collapsing bubble, all that energy goes into squeezing down that reentrant jet. Here's a collapsing bubble. They call that the reentrant jet right here. That the pressures are so great, it actually takes a solid state form. And in my book, I talk about Mark Leclerc's work, who's an expert on these cavitation. This is from the presentation in 2012 that he made. And at the very tip of that reentrant jet, it makes the craters, carved trenches. He called that a plasma bow shock wave. That's the same phenomena as an EV. I was immediately, when I talked to him about that, I said, that's the same thing as EVs. I got him and Ken Shoulders to talk. Just before Ken passed away, they got one conversation in. And so he was discovering, and there's amazing, when we talk about transmutation occurring in electrolyzers and things like that, it's because of strikes from these EV-type phenomena. I can't get into that on this presentation, but it's certainly in the book, and I've covered it in the past presentations. But that's where the transmutation events come from that. And there's the craters from the cavitation. So if they actually studied in detail the craters, they might see transmuted elements there. And naturally, in all the turbulence, they don't let bubbles get big. They naturally makes nanobubbles, so the microbubbles don't really get to grow big. And then snapping blades makes them as well, because behind a very rapidly moving blade, like an ore, you move it very rapidly, it pulls the vacuum, and you make your nanobubble. And that's what Ryushin Amasa did with his fluttering blades. The snap, and that's launching the reentrant jet. Amasa, I think this was the peak project. We saw the video on it. When he stored his gas, he made a point. He vented away all hydrogen. His containment was porous to hydrogen. He only wanted the pure cluster gas. He got help at the university to measure what he had, and indeed, it was nanobubbles cocooning hydrogen, protons. So he cocooned the charge in the bubbles, and the bubbles were very tough. So never an experiment ever mix hydrogen and oxygen, loose hydrogen and oxygen together under pressure. That's an explosive mixture. So he made sure in his experiments he vented it. And he was only storing that cocoon mixture. And that's what his discovery was. He made them on his electrolyzer. There's an acronym that he invented. Oh my gosh, more synchronicity. It sounds just like his name. There's the video. Here's a view of the blades. Here's where the electrolyzer plates are. A close-up of the blades. He really talked about snapping the blades. Very important how quickly they do. His roots were making mixing. He's a mechanical engineer for making mixing emulsions. He just tried an electrolysis experiment with this and made this discovery. There's a blow-up of the blade from the patent. Holes. Loses over half his area on his electroplates, so he can shoot the reentrant jets, so he can shoot the cavitating water into the electrolyzer. This would be stupid if you're trying to do electrolysis, because you lost your surface area. Right? And that's the idea. The snapping blades gets all that water, reentrant jets, the whole 9 yards, and thus in the electrolysis process, no microbubbles ever grow. He's making tons of these cocoon nanobubbles. This is the peak, 2011 peaks. This is a Japanese news special. An exchange student from Japan happened to stop at my house this summer, could speak fluent Japanese. He played the video for him, and he helped translate it. And what I said was the book was pretty well on the money. I inferred it from the slides. This was a news special, prime time, all of Japan, right, in 2011. They were puzzled by his device. There's a picture of his blade, the wide blade. Ran scooters on the gas here to run cars. He had to mix in a little propane. What does that give you? A little more flash to the plasma. And so it wasn't quite enough. The generators experiment, that was the important one, because that's where you can start to measure your energy input and output. So what's this graphic mean? Costing 2 kilowatt hours in, you got 5 kilowatt hours out. It was truly over unity. That panel was puzzled, right? They were all talking about that. How could this be? On this energy study, why I was mad that he mixed propane in, because didn't he demonstrate that little engine that just ran on the pure gas right in the video? Why is he obscuring the science by mixing in a different fuel? Right? A different fuel can help because it helps flash the plasma, and if the important thing is making all that plasma to make a ball of lightning, it helps. But for the science, you would like a pure experiment with no extra fuel. That's what happened to him. Last seen speaking at the Emoto conference in 2012. The student went ahead on the web, dove into his company. He was the founder and president of the company. Shell company's still there, he's not mentioned. Right? Gone. That was the most successful project that we had in a country that desperately needed energy. Fukushima just happened before, right? And whatever powers that be that stop them, it's not the government, because they wanted it. Microchannels can also, this was a discovery by the Japanese inventor, that just shearing blowing air through microchannels and then shearing it with a fast water flow could also make nanobubbles. What could be simpler? People got mad at him that had the expensive cavitation engines because he could undercut them in the price on making those. And so high-speed shear, right? It also can charge by electrostatic friction, can charge. And when you charge the particle, you just makes it more stable. So it's another way to do it. T.P. Provinslik had a nice paper up on the web titled Bubbles and Steam Electricity, talked about zero-point energy a little bit, and talked about just the electrostatic rubbing. Like they observe it in the boilers, right? You can get a shock off a boiler just from the electrostatic rubbing of the steam. So these are all little clues. So what happens, building up a surface on electrolyzers can carve microchannels as you gradually build the surface. So to talk about conditioning the surface, you remember reading that on the HHO project, you condition the surface. As you run electrolysis and you keep cleaning it up, you are gradually carving microchannels into it, and thus it allows the electrode now to release nanobubbles and not grow into microbubbles. And so that there's talks on the web and the various projects about the conditioning. I enjoyed Ravi Virju's because he was working with tap water in India. Tap water in India, please, that is not a controlled experiment. The only thing you know for sure about that water is you mustn't drink it. I was not having success. Dave Lawton, working with the old Stan Meyer electrolyzer. He's a pretty good guy. You should read Patrick Kelly's book because really good engineer retired out of Harnwell Labs. That's like our Lawrence Livermore. This guy's really, really competent. And he has a lot of stuff that he's invented and works on. Really, really research. Well, he helped Ravi Virju to condition his electrodes. And it took a month. And then eventually it finally got it to work. Had to do this protocol. This was complicated. But they said, do not touch the surface, right? You wreck the microchannels. It's a very, very fragile surface. So they really, really stressed that. Bob Boyce did a great job because he communicated a protocol and the same idea of conditioning a place, except it only took 3 days. So, and he really got the HHO community launched with his protocol, so people could start to get a lot more of these bubbles going on. And his residue was the potassium hydroxide or sodium hydroxide, whatever you're using. You build up a little residue on the plates, but you're carving these microchannels through it. Once again, do not touch it. So in these narrow gap electrolyzers, we got lots of activity, sputtering, turbulence, cavitation. That's the purpose of having very narrow gaps, so you don't let anything, but you're trying to shear off the nanobubbles quickly. And so the purpose of all that is for that shearing event, so we get to the nanobubbles. The Anton cell is famous because of a project in Germany. It was an extremely good cell, 1 millimeter gap, high quality German precision engineering, right? Steve Eaton, another project. Now, Steve Eaton is famous because he was attempting to go open source right away with this project. He made very tiny gaps. He's used like a fishing line to separate the things, forcing the water and sputtering to spiral all the way up. He said they had to be a longer pipes, and then he was able to make a self-running genset. He attempted to go Friday the 13th. I remember November, Friday the 13th. 2009, he was trying to share the information on the web. He knew he had to go open source because of the suppression. And for a couple weeks, the information got out. And then the website was attacked. He went silent, will no longer participate. I was lucky enough to talk to his partner, Jeff Sokol, who he teamed with to try to do a business out of it. But they said, we got to go open source because of the suppression. He never made it, and he's silent today. Oliver Valentine, they were out of Germany. They were participating as hobbyists, and they were very open source the whole way. During their project, they were very active in the blogs, the open source blogs, and they had they would adjust the timing so the piston would fire top dead center, etc. But they used the Anton cell, and then their famous elevator ride with the cart. Right, they put up the YouTube. It was like the Christmas YouTube. It was like the Christmas gift to humanity. I think it was 2010. taking the cart for an elevator ride, and they likewise went silent, right? No more activity, no more nothing from them. Injecting fog, that's the simplest, right? There's talks on the blog about that. People didn't understand why. What's the point of fog? Because they're thinking hydrogen, so it was not really popular. But darn, that's where Walt hit the nail on the head, right? Put it all together. Got it charged so it's stable. Can direct it because it's charged in the internal combustion. The ultrasonic frequencies, we're picking, on the order of a megahertz because it makes visible fog. Wide open to explore up the spectrum, higher and higher frequencies. Nobody bothered exploring that. There could be other stable forms of even smaller nanobubbles of water, smaller particles. Nobody's explored it yet. It's a good idea. We got to get them converted to ball lightning. That's where the wide plasma spark plug comes in. Walt did a terrific job with his. Krupa has the rights, the claims for shaping for the plasma, and he did a great job. Robert Krupa was looking at improving gasoline burn with a wide plasma spark plug. It says you get a wider plasma, you burn the gas. Plus, it's tougher. These spark plugs would not wear out. And really creative guy. He should have been a winner. I like this idea. See those dimpled forms? In the dimples, you build up a little glow plasma. So then when it fires, you have a more uniform plasma being ejected, more spherical plasma. Very, very clever. It's the same thing they do in hollow cathode. So you get a lot more. There's commercial spark plugs that use capacitive discharge that makes more plasma. There's the standard shaped spark plugs. They're typically for racing cars. And so they're available for purchase. Here's the pulsar plug. The cylinder is a cylindrical capacitor, kind of shaped around the plug. I personally knew David Yerth. He teamed with Monros as the lead inventor. This touted the materials. They wanted it had unusual materials in it to withstand longevity, because spark plugs erode over time. So they were claiming that on their part. And here's a picture from their project of it in action. Aaron Kami, he runs the Coeur d'Alene conference, the wonderful conference. He has published a patent on ignition secrets, and this is the key to abruptly discharging a capacitor. Most garage guys are not used to electrical engineering techniques, so this really helped. Because of new solid-state switching is very, very good now, so you can get these nice high-voltage switches so that you can actually dump the capacitor. There's the capacitor right there. Into the spark. So he uses a normal coil to get the gap ionized, and then it's like closing a switch, and then he directs the capacitor completely dump all its energy very abruptly. So since it's very, very important to do it abruptly, circuits like this can be really helpful and really good. And Aaron's work is a great resource for hobbyists who want to work with the abrupt discharge. And so you get a lot more plasma from it. So basically that's it. The pulse plasmoid engine creates a huge anomalous force from all this ball lightning activity. So to wrap it up, closed loop self-running system is a spectacular claim. If it was just hydrogen combustion, you'd have to be way over unity for that. Hydrogen's not going to do it. Uncompressed hydrogen cannot explain the anomalies. So what's going on? I suggest we're converting the fog particles, the pinches into the torus to make the ball lightning plasmoid. That's when the orthorotation from the higher dimensions come in, and the self-organization occurs. That plasma self-accelerates like a flying saucer, puts the anomalous force on the piston, and the best is yet to come. You start to make vortices of this, you'll probably get more power still. Paul Pantone, I think that's the type of thing he was activating. He was basically entraining ether, right? He's on to new science. That's why his claims are so spectacular. Approaching the plasma vortex, a dual plasma vortex. Dual means opposite helicity. The vacuum likes to make things in pairs, likes to conserve angular momentum. So if you have right-handed spin, you want a left-handed spin at the same time. So they overlap them in the geat. It's very clever. I wonder what inspired Paul to do The water arc explosions are the bird in hand for an actual academic experiment. Anomaly every single time. Excess over unity proved, every single pulse. Lots of ways to make the nanobubbles. That was the point of conditioning electrodes, so we can make the nanobubbles. The inventors, the injector plug by Myers, the snapping blades by Massa, and Walt is using the simplest with the ultrasound. The wide plasma spark plugs, get all those nanobubbles converted over, because it's just water. We're not combusting anything. We want them all converted over to the ball lightning, so we want the wide plasma on the spark event. Just putting it all together, you got the pulse plasmoid engine or the thunderclap engine. I predict Walt Jenkins will become more famous than Stan Myers because he put it all together. He put the pond fogger, put the fog in, the wide plasma spark plug, the whole 9 yards. Let's mimic a thunderclap and change the world. Thank you. So, just advertise a little bit. The books are over in the bookstore. These are the Energy Machine of T. Henry Moray. His last name was the same as my first name. Well, that was the one hell of a synchronicity. I'll be talking about that tomorrow at the other conference. I'll be talking about that device. I'm destined to keep talking about it for some reason. Here's my new book. Thanks to you all. Includes my, let me finish, one slide left. Includes the cover story that I got in Infinite Energy magazine. An expanded version of that paper is in the book. Okay, let me go one slide and I'm done. I don't want any. I don't want to play any more videos. I want to engage in discussion. Yeah, we're going to Q&A. So let me kick it off. Give me back my slide. Yeah. Paradigm shifts. I get a discussion with, this is Gary Hendershot, a Smart Scarecrow show. 2014, we went in depth on what's stopping us, right? What's stop? So what do you guys think, right? What oil companies, just shout it out. What do you think? Any other ideas? Military industrial complex? Yes, that's getting there. Human mass consciousness getting stuck in the comfortable. And I'll agree with you, it's belief. I've been interacting with academics and professors and conservative scientists, you know, and it's belief by far. And even, it can't be true, it can't be true, it can't be true, it must be a fraud. Right? And so if they actually investigated and there was something honest there, the guy would get mad. Somehow you tricked me and I couldn't figure out the trick. Right? They get mad at the inventor because they know it has to be a fraud. By far, belief is dominant. Most of the time it's just ridicule and name calling and shunning and that sort of thing. It's harmless. You have to get a ways before your project actually matures to where you threaten to breach the marketplace. At that point, then those other forces come in. The men in black, the threats, the oil interests or whatever. You can't change the world like that. That very, very few make it that far to where you're about to have a commercial success. And that's when these projects get hammered. And by all rights, Omasa should have been a Grand Slam home run. He got enough of it to have the excess energy and self-running. And in a country that desperately needed that energy. And he's gone. Just out of the picture, disappeared. And so I mean, I'm picking the best of the best on these slide decks with 5 or 6 projects that just wowed me over the years. And a lot of people responded by teaching, like Bob Boyce. He was harassed and suppressed. He underwent a lot of trouble, and he tells the stories. He just went to teaching. Just get it out there, because replication beats suppression. So I think we can open up to you guys. We have time for questions. We've got a mic over there. By the way, you can get all my stuff. Just Google Rex Research King, and you get Robert Nelson's site, and that's the web page, and you can get all the downloads of everything. And this will be up soon.
This thing up? Oh yeah, it was. Great presentation. Appreciate it. We all loved it. You mentioned some things here at the very end here. What's the problem? How come all these people disappear and then fantastic inventions just don't make it up there? Well, we all know it's control. Gasoline is controllable by the gallon. Water isn't. And we fear that could be the silent dark group, the shadow up above that we don't know about. We know we have suspicions of, but can we put our fingers on them? And that's why I worry to this moment that what's about to happen, has to go gradually, very small, not all at once. If it goes all at once, you got to do it at the back door, snake attack. And I think Walt's plan is going to do that.
Yeah. And teaching, Bob Boyce became a teacher. Teaching, the idea is to build numbers.
Could you elaborate a little more on Omasa and how long was it on the market? And you said he disappeared, but I was wondering, is the company making the machine? I wasn't clear on that.
Right. No, they are. You saw the 2009 video. That was the announcement to the world. He just received the patent. That was October 31st, Halloween, 2009. 2 weeks later, Steve Eaton tried to go up with his, sharing the world. So I call that window the peak of HHO because of Omasa had the winning project. And he got to 2011. So the answer is, I do not think they sold anything. That company was extremely well funded. If you read the patents and you read the work that he did, that was extremely expensive research. His electrolyzer was top of the line, platinum plates. Everything about that, everything about this research and how far they made it, to make it to that Japanese news special, to announce to the entire country on public TV at prime time with a very famous newscaster as the host, right? The entire country was informed.
And that was 2011?
2011.
And so he disappeared, but did the machine disappear? And what about the company? Do they have multiple projects and they just kind of shelved this one? Is that what you're...
Yeah, you could research the company. What they found, that they seem to be doing nothing. We're a company, we exist. He's no longer listed with them. What do they make? Who knows? They are not doing that project.
Oh, they're not doing that one. Thank you.
Bearing in mind that the body contains as much as 90% water in some systems, do you think that any of the mechanisms that you proposed or lectured about could occur in the body, and specifically whether or not zero-point energy could be tapped into the body, bearing in mind that DNA, as I've mentioned in the past, exists as a toroid?
Oh, absolutely. Especially the membrane phenomena, water and membranes. Oh my gosh, what happens in biology is incredible. We are ionic beings to start with, so you have all this ion motion. You have ion events and ion discharges that we know in the nerves, right? All this activity is happening I believe it's happening in biology all over the place, and I really think we're ZPE beings, and I know how to use it.
What would you say would be the minimum length of duration of one of these sparks to be effective, and what would you estimate a range of size of these nanobubbles before they actually begin to show this effect?
Okay, I didn't quite understand the question. The first part was the
How long
spark.
is the discharge of the spark to be effective?
In my opinion, especially from the explosive water work of Grenou and Gary Johnson, the faster the better, right? So the faster you can switch, the more you dump quickly.
Okay, but
But if the goal is just to get that ball lightning made and keep it made, right? Just so we get enough plasma in there to surround it. Mm-hmm. So from what I've seen, the pattern is the more abrupt, the bigger the anomaly.
Okay, so you're talking about megahertz frequencies or gigahertz, or what are you talking about?
Yeah, these days, as far as the switching event, how quickly to switch. Yeah, I think it's more expensive, of course, to do it. So but Dave Faust in the 70s was I think his switching was sub-millisecond. I don't know if he was even microsecond. Can't quite recall the numbers. It was old technology, and he could get the EVs going.
Okay, so you can work in those ranges. What about the size of the bubbles that you'd have to have before they actually had made this effect?
The size of
yeah,
the...
as they get as any bubbles you make in any of these processes, as the bubbles get smaller, they get more effective, right?
Well, you know, the answer is we don't know, right? Just to get something stable, I was grateful for that discovery. In my opinion, there's a holy grail water cluster. I think it's 3 nanometers. It's theoretical. I personally do not know, since the water community right now does not know. They're struggling with how do you even explain it, and they're not jumping on cocoon of charge, right in it. There's some papers that talk about trapping charge. Right. And I think if they put that as part of in their modeling, I think they'll easily get electrostatic stability to be able to explain it. Because water is polarized, right? And so I can't state, because the water community doesn't know yet. And I think Japan is the furthest ahead on that investigation.
Okay.
Thank you. Do you think the rise time of the spark makes a difference?
The rise time?
Of the spark.
Yeah, if you want it quick, the quicker the better. So rise time is when the event occurs, and then the discharge. But I don't know how critical. I'm just looking at Peter Granot's work and Gary Johnson's work on bulk water, where they really stressed it. And also Ken Shoulders stressed it in his patent, that to launch the EV, it needs to be very quick. So if your lines are too long, you have too much residual inductance, and then you won't get a quick enough discharge, and you doesn't get the EV. So from what I've seen, the quicker the better, but I can't state the spec exactly in microseconds.
Okay, thank you.
Would be better.
I'd just like to add a comment on the rise time. First, the pulses, I think, should be the leading edge, the fast edge of the pulse, should be negative going, not positive going. And second of all, the amount of time that the pulse takes from the generation source to wherever it ends has to be so that when the pulse arrives at the end, the source has completed. The pulse is down. Those are two conditions.
There's a tip. And he knows his electrical engineering. He's also speaking tomorrow. Any more questions? Okay, John will now sing us a song.
Ladies and gentlemen, the king has been in the house. Moray King.